I hear this from people who maybe have graduated from college and they're super frustrated with the job market because they're like, everything I apply for says that I have to have 2 to 5 years of experience. But hey, I just got my degree, so I have 0 years of experience and I'm trying to get these. But the entry-level jobs that are asking for this, why is that? Well, I think part of the reason for that is that employers are extremely confused as to what a degree means. So they don't know what kind of results they're getting.
Yep.
And so what's the best way to measure results? Well, to talk to a previous employer. But it was interesting in this reference I did yesterday. It was for a job that required some specialty and some pretty sophisticated information. And the person applying for the job didn't have that. And the person hiring said, oh, I'm not concerned about that at all. I have the best people in the world in these areas. And we're really good teachers. So we can teach that. But what's hard for me is to find something who's willing to learn, somebody who's willing to learn. Mm-hmm. If they're willing to do that, I can give them the specialized information. Welcome back to the Be Unbound podcast. I'm your co-host, Jonathan Brush.
And I'm your co-host, David Rathenmeyer.
So right before we started recording here, I told David I was going to get my little soapbox. And then I was thinking about, anymore, it's a soapbox that's so big, it probably has some corners and some extensions and maybe a few rooms. And this is one of the extensions and one of the rooms. But we're in an interesting situation where we're helping out with local business, and that local business requires people that come into kind of entry-level jobs in like a coffee shop and a deli and a store type of situation. And as I've observed this business, and we've worked with them for some years now and looked at some things happening, there's this recurring theme. And I find this fascinating, interesting, infuriating, frustrating all at the same time, David, and we were talking about this. And that is that there are people who do what I would consider to be fairly normal things. And this runs a risk of sounding like an old person saying, and I don't mean it that way. I just mean that they do what I would consider to be relatively unspectacular things, like show up for work on time consistently, almost never call in sick unless they really are really, really sick, stay busy while they're at work, treat people with respect, and respect the authority of their managers, and don't complain about the place they're working at. That sounds to me like fairly basic stuff. Mm-hmm. What's interesting to me is that those fairly basic things have become superpowers, and consistently people that do that wind up with outsized authority in this business and lots of others that we work with because it's so exceptional. And this is not a complaint about the state of kids these days. I don't mean that like that at all. In fact, I see this as an opportunity, right? There's an opportunity for people to do relatively easy things and get really outsized returns for it, which puts them in a position to serve people in a much better way. And I find that really interesting. When I see stuff like that, it just really catches my attention, and I get curious about it, and I kind of want to ask some questions about it, and I want to share it and say like, hey, look over here. There's some weird opportunity here for what kind of feels like normal stuff,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's something that I've observed as well, just both in my time as a worker and just working alongside of businesses where there's, a lot of those opportunities. And it's just really interesting to see that and to just kind of see the gap that is left, because there's just been more and more of a mindset, at least based on my observations, of, well, this is an entry-level job, therefore it's not actually worth putting real effort into. It's not worth it for me to actually care about doing all of those things. It's usually not that people don't understand, oh, I should show up on time, I should be respectful to people. Usually, to some degree, the workers who are failing to do these things understand that that is a good thing to do, that that's a good approach. They're just choosing not to because they don't feel like that's necessary for them, that in order to earn the same paycheck, that's not necessarily required. And so then that just creates much more of an opportunity for the people who are willing to put in that little bit of extra effort and are willing to say, hey, maybe this isn't actually like going to be a long-term job for me. Maybe this isn't something that I want to be my long-term career, but I'm going to give it my all anyways, can end up reaping a lot of very outsized benefits, more outsized benefits than have been previously available, especially, I think, is the trend that you're observing.
There's an opportunity piece here, and we see some of the same consistent concerns and problems. And so here's one that I hear a lot. I hear this from people who maybe have graduated from college or who are a couple years out of whatever their final education thing is. And they're super frustrated with the job market because they're like, I have a IT related degree, and everything I apply for says that I have to have 2 to 5 years of experience. But hey, I just got my degree, so I have 0 years of experience, and I'm trying to get these. But the entry level jobs that are asking for this are, well, okay, why is that? Well, I think part of the reason for that is that employers are extremely confused as to what a degree means. So they don't know what kind of results they're getting.
Yep.
And so what's the best way to measure results? Well, to talk to a previous employer. So if I can talk to a previous employer, and I just did a reference for somebody yesterday, and I do probably 8 or 9 of them a week, people are calling and saying, okay, tell me, does this person really know something, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it was interesting in this reference I did yesterday. It was for a job that required some specialty and some pretty sophisticated information. And the person applying for the job didn't have that. And the person hiring said, oh, I'm not concerned about that at all. That's really specific information. In fact, this was aviation information. So, and he said, but I have the best people in the world in these areas. Like literally some of the preeminent experts in these particular facets of the aviation industry, they work for us. And we're really good teachers. So we can teach that. But what's hard for me is to find something who's willing to learn, somebody who's willing to learn.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you're in the audience, whether you're a parent or even applying to you personally or you're a young adult, I want you to really zone in on that, because I hear that repeatedly. I heard it most recently yesterday in the aviation context, but I'd say that is a pretty normal conversation we have on a week-to-week basis. More recently, it was for a construction job. Like, I don't need somebody to come up here and have any interest. They don't even know what end of the hammer to hold. Doesn't matter. Like if they don't know that. What I need is somebody who's willing to learn how to do this thing that I'm teaching.
Mm-hmm.
If they're willing to do that, I can give them the specialized information. Well, that changes everything, because I think there's a situation where people think I need to go to some place to gain specialized knowledge. And this is going to come into our whole answers, questions-based paradigm here, David.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm going to go into, I'm going to get all the answers. And then I'm going to be able to do that. I'm going to get a college degree. I'm going to get a certificate. I'm going to get trade school. I'm going to get whatever. Now I know how to do this. And now I'll go and they'll hire me because I know how to do this. And the people hiring are like, I don't even care about that. In fact, the only reason I'm requiring that at all is because I don't care about whether they taught you specifically what to do that I need you to do. I'm interested in whether they taught you how to learn so I can teach you what I need you to do.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. Especially as you get higher and higher in just like the levels of companies, they are just investing more and more in just being able to teach people, because, I mean, listen, this is something we talk about a lot at Unbound, is that companies are realizing more and more that college is not actually being effective at equipping young adults with practical skills. So companies are realizing they have to do that part. So they're not actually relying on colleges to be able to do that. And so many of the larger companies are even dropping their degree requirements as a result. But that aside, though, teachability is just a massive, massive asset. And I remember a specific point when I was working my very first job in high school at a local restaurant. I was working in the back, and at the time, at least, all I was doing was I was just doing dishes. That's all I was doing. That was my assignment, was just to do all the dishes and to manage everything and to do that well. And that was enough of a job in and of itself. But I remember very specifically there was one point at which I was finishing up with my shift on the dishes, and technically there was a little bit of time left in my shift, and I saw the manager was working on something else, like doing some prep work for like prepping some of the food. And I just remember just going up to ask him, like, hey, can you teach me how to do that? I'd be really interested in learning how to do that. And he just kind of looked at me like, just flabbergasted, like, but that's not your job. And like it came out almost accusatory, but it was mostly just very confused because he'd never heard somebody ask that. And I was just coming from the position of just like, well, I'm kind of bored doing dishes at this point, and so I'd like to just learn to do something else. If I'm here, I might as well just figure out how to do something else. And just the fact that I just asked that, and then he proceeded to teach me how to do the prep work, and then that allowed me to gain not only a lot more skills, but that ended up getting me a lot more relational capital in that job that I had at that point. And I can tell you several other stories of other individuals that I know who have done similar things, where just putting in the little bit of extra effort to show whatever employer you might be working for, large or small, like, hey, I'm interested in taking on a little bit more. And, here's what I know. Here's what I don't know. Can you fill in the gaps of where I don't know things? And being upfront with that is such a game changer.
We recently talked in a recent podcast about having discipline and having, this ability to do things that are hard and to kind of stick to it and have purpose in that. And one of the things that I see so often, and David, you alluded to this earlier, is people say, well, this is just an entry-level job. This is just a job at a fast food restaurant. This is just, there's no this is just, right? All of those jobs give you an opportunity to practice discipline. They give you an opportunity to figure out what purpose is connected. Even if, I've used this example for years, even if you have a job that you think is a complete dead-end job and it's not going anywhere, well, then you need to attach it to purpose. Like, why are you doing that job? Well, probably because you're trying to pay your rent or feed your family or maybe buy that car or whatever it is, right? I mean, but there's a purpose to it. Even if you think the job itself is fairly frustrating, the earnings you get from it has purpose. And so to connect those two things ends up being really important. And so when we think about this in terms of young workers and entry-level jobs and first-time jobs and all those kinds of things, what's really intriguing to me is that I would consider this to be fairly basic stuff. And I don't mean that in some old guy way or whatever. I just, this is the thing that makes the world go round, right? Like you need people like this. And for whatever reason, it's in scarce supply right now. Well, supply and demand's a thing. And so when there's a low supply of it, there's a high demand for it. And right now, there's a high demand for people that do relatively basic stuff, in my opinion, and there's a low supply of those. And so if you're the kind of person that can consistently show up, if you're the kind of person that never has a sick day for the most part, if you're the kind of person that asks your manager to teach them something new, if you're the kind of person that when business slows down, you pick up a broom and start doing something else, if you're the kind of person that asks good questions and says, well, why, how can I help with this? If you're the kind of person that comes to serve, those things tremendously make a difference. And then if you want to add on to that some super fuel, if you're the kind of person that is humble enough to be taught, and I'll embarrass David here, but a while back we were in a situation where we had to do a lot of things fast. And in fact, one of our people said, hey, I'm giving you everything I've got. I don't think it's enough. So you're going to have to get me some help. Okay, well, I just want you to pause and understand the immensity of that statement. Do you know how many people will not have the ability to set aside their ego enough to say, I'm giving you everything and it's not enough, so you're going to have to find a way to teach me more? And so for us, that meant going outside and hiring an outside firm that had some of these skills that they could teach us. Now, there was a few leadership problems on my part, and David got surprised by this. And it moved faster than I expected. And so we had not brought David in on any of this stuff. And all of a sudden we have a phone call where he's talking to somebody. Now he's knowing this cold. And if I'm David, this looks like it appears that somebody just got hired to do my job, right? An outside firm just got hired to do my job. And then, that person said, hey, tell me what you know about this, this, and this. If I'm David, the temptation has got to be, somebody's got hired to do my job. I better look really good about all the stuff that I know. And what was happening that was different was David's like, I can do this and I can do this, and I know nothing about that. And the guy that came in, who David didn't know this, but we had hired to teach, said, oh, great, I can work with you, man. In other words, like he was so excited. And I was sitting there realizing belatedly what happened. I didn't warn David. I caught him cold. This looks a whole lot like I'm outsourcing his job. And now he's being asked to basically state his performance abilities and without any context. And he just, I don't know if he took a deep breath or not. I didn't see him do it. He just answered straight up. I can do this and not this. That's transformative as far as I'm concerned. Give me people like that on my team, and whatever my role is in the team, I want to lock arms with those people and take on any challenges in the world because I know we can figure it out, right? I mean, because I know that at that point, you've got people who are humble enough to learn and willing to have the work ethic to do it, and then we'll figure it out. Well, that's a great attitude to have in today's world where technology disrupts things so fast that everybody's kind of in a situation of going, I'm not really sure what's next. And we're going to have to all figure it out together. So I state those things, and I want to state it in a way that we're careful here. We're not complaining about all kids these days, they don't have this stuff. That's just an observation. That's what employers are telling us. That's what we're experiencing in different places. So if you're somebody that does have those things or willing to develop those things, work ethic, humility, productivity, the opportunities are looking pretty spectacular, people. Be like David and be on a podcast with me. How spectacular is that, right, David?
Well, I certainly have a lot of fun, but for reference, I did not actually ask Jonathan to tell that story for any sort of reference, and I hope that does not.
Yeah, he probably was hoping we wouldn't tell that story, but anyhow.
But yeah, and like there's just a lot of opportunity there. And one of the things that I've learned from like working in and around smaller businesses, especially, but I think that this can apply in larger businesses too, is especially for those who are willing to communicate to their managers, or especially if the manager is somebody who actually has stake in the company, that they understand that like that this is more than just a job to them, and that like this has really significant meaning, and that even if you as the lower level employee don't necessarily have a greater stake, a greater investment, if this is not like what you're staking your career on, understanding that you are working around and for people who are staking their career on and for it, and are just doing their best to say, hey, maybe this isn't my end all be all of a job, but I know that it is really important to you. And so in the little role that you've given me here, how can I actually make sure that you feel like I'm on your team? I'm not just a tool running a coffee machine or somebody who is just doing the dishes. I want to come alongside you and help you to feel like you are like I am somebody who is helping you to achieve the entire goals that you are looking to work towards in this business. And I think that's a mindset that I think ends up getting talked about a lot more in sort of more of like a like consulting based businesses, but really just whenever you're doing any sort of work for any sort of business, that's kind of, to use your word, is a superpower, is to make sure that your managers and the people who are up higher in the company know that, hey, regardless of whatever happens, like, I get that you're invested in this. I want to help make sure that you can make that happen. And the amount of, even if that doesn't necessarily raise your pay, the amount of relational capital that you get from that is massive.
So I want to turn this conversation a little bit, because that's all true. And I think that's like solid. We're not always an advice podcast, but if I was going to give advice, I'm pretty serious about this stuff because I know it works. Like, I mean, I've seen this consistently. But we are a podcast that tries to look a little deeper and talks about, what does this mean practically, because it's informed by our faith. And I think that one thing that is often missing from these discussions is that, and you heard me trying to guard against it the whole way through. It's like, old people are like, kids these days, they don't work at all, and it's like, hey, kid, you want to do really good, work like I did when I was a kid, and then things will be great. Okay, well, there's an element of that that's not wrong, and there's actually an element that's always been true. Like the older generation knows more about work because they've done more of it, and so passing it on to the younger generation is not a bad thing. Okay, so it's worth observing, and there might even be some elements of that are maybe more true today in some fashion, in some ways, that's worth observing. So we did that. But there's a bigger piece here. And this goes to this phrase that I keep referring to that David said, like, well, it's kind of like a throwaway job because it's an entry-level job, or it's like, I don't matter, but this job doesn't matter. And I think that is pervasive. And it's not just entry-level jobs. There is a kind of growing idea that a job is a necessary evil, or people say, I'm spell it out like it's a swear word. I'm G-O-B, or, it's a 4-letter word. A job's 4-letter word. There's this kind of poor attitude about work in general. And one thing that I kind of want to introduce in this conversation that I think gets to that kind of practical living is that as Christians, we ought not to share that perspective, because at root and at heart, what you do for work is a base element of how you worship, how you serve, and how you participate in the redemption of all things. And then I would suggest something else, which is the way you are designed, the way that you are actually made. You are made to want to accomplish, to want to achieve, and to want to produce, which is just a fancy way of saying you were actually made to want to work. And I think that we sometimes miss this, that there's a deep satisfaction in doing good work, regardless of the kind of work that you're doing, whether it's entry level or top level, whether you're getting paid a lot or a little, whether you're at the bottom of the food chain or the bottom of the food chain, whatever regards to responsibility. Doing good work is ultimately deeply satisfying. People are most miserable when they're unemployed. The Great Depression wasn't just about the lack of money. It was about the lack of work. It was a lack of being able, people didn't die to commit suicide and jump out of buildings necessarily because they had debt, although that was the case of it. They often did it because they couldn't contribute. They couldn't do something that mattered. And so that can be a really infusing, foundational, transformative, I try to use the right words here, idea when you start to realize, I'm not going to work to earn money to avoid going to work. I'm not going to work so I can retire as early as possible. I'm not going to work so I can stop working. I'm going to work because this is a inherently good thing for me to do with my time. That the work that I do, and it can be in many contexts, from volunteer to paid, right? But the work that I do, the work of my hands is a good thing. It's a purposeful thing. It's a thing that changes the world. It's a thing that blesses other people. It's a thing that can be an act of worship. It should be an act of worship. And that changes things entirely. And look, if you go in with that attitude, all this kind of like show up early, work hard, ask your boss, it's just that. It's advice. You'll figure that all out immediately if you have that kind of attitude.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's worth noting that even that scripturally, like the basis for this is the fact that when Adam and Eve were first in the garden, they worked far before sin, far before the incident with the
pre-fall.
apple.
That's right.
Yeah, it was work was a pre-fall activity. Adam and Eve worked in the garden, and they were perfect, and it was perfect. It was without sin. It was before the fall. It wasn't until after the fall when when scripture talks about the sweat from the brow and the toil and just like a lot of the negative things that we also associate with work came about. But it's really worth noting that prior state of work. And I think I'll extrapolate a little bit here, but I don't think it's too terribly much of a stretch to say that there's scriptural basis for that, because of that in heaven, when we get to eternity, we're not just going to be standing around, just looking around, just being happy about the fact that we made it to the good place. There's going to be things for us to do. There is going to be a new heaven and a new earth and new things for us to do. God has designed each one of us individually with individual gifts and skills and abilities. And I don't think that those are going to go to waste in eternity. And especially if you look at this world as an opportunity to get a head start in starting to build and understand those and say, hey, this is just the beginning of what I'm going to spend eternity doing. Now, in eternity, we're not going to have to deal with all of the consequences and the challenges of a fallen world, but we're still going to have work and things that we'll be doing. We don't know exactly what that's going to be like necessarily, but I, for one, when I realize that, and I then just look at my day-to-day work and understand that I am using, although probably in a vastly different way, some of the same skills, the same talents, the same God-given things right now that I'm going to be using in eternity, then that makes it way more exciting.
I agree, David. That idea, I think for me, a change of attitude towards eternity, a heaven with, sitting around in clouds playing harps when I'm not a musical person and don't play a harp sounds not so exciting. And that's kind of the caricature, right?
Mm-hmm.
But an eternity where I'm constantly working and learning new skills and creating things of value holds deep appeal to me.
Mm-hmm.
I had this interesting process recently where in the last several weeks I've had a lot of people go out of their way to tell me, I envy you because your work has meaning. Now that's flattering, and we care a lot about what we do at Unbound, even what we do with this podcast, and I tell people, I pinch myself every day when I get up. I can't believe I get to do this to support my family. Like, this is the work that pays my bills. We get to work with extraordinary people on our team. We get to work with extraordinary students, and we get to do things that we do care deeply and passionately about. But I reject this idea that my work has meaning less than the people that were talking to me, because I think that every moment, every task, every second is freighted and weighted with meaning and purpose. And it is part of redeeming the time. It's required of playing a part in the redemption of all things and the renewal of all things. And you have a mission that. And so I was just thinking about, today I was trying to go through this, David, and think. So I went to a place that is a restaurant, and I was doing some work there. I had a meeting there, and I was doing some work there. Okay, well, the people that maintain that building, they gave me a place to meet. That was an extreme blessing to me. And the meeting that I was having was for a local civic organization that we're doing some work that is, volunteer nonprofit type work. So their work wasn't just sweeping the floors and wiping the tables. It was actually to create a process and a place where we got to meet to do something that will benefit the community. So indirectly, there's a help there, right? But then somebody prepared food for me there. And so that was a blessing to me because it gave me some convenience at the time. I didn't have time to go home and get something to eat. And so I was able to eat there. But when I was able to eat there, I was able to fellowship with some people some that I met as I was talking to there. And so we get to have some really cool interactions. And so the work somebody did to prepare my food and to prepare that place for me was a blessing to me inherently, not because of the work that I did, just of who I was, right? But somebody delivered that stuff. And while I was there, a truck pulled in. And so there's a truck driver and a bunch of warehouse workers who put all the food on, unloaded it, and all those kinds of things. They are in that chain as well. Well, I came home and I had to do some stuff with my wife, and then she had to take some equipment that had to be FedEx someplace, right? Well, you think about people that think, well, my job's not meaningful. People talk about that if they're in like a warehouse, or maybe they think that they're just a truck driver, delivery truck driver. Yeah, it's very meaningful to me right now. This piece of equipment absolutely has to be someplace at a certain time. It's going to make a big difference in the person that gets that. And so every single person on that chain, from the person that takes the order to do that, to the person that gets it to the warehouse, to the truck driver that drives it, to the person that unloads it at the other warehouse and sorts it, all those things to me have meaning. They're all the redemption of all things. They're all, to me, that's all holy work in the sense that that it's necessary work. It's a blessing to me. And then also the work that I do, I paid money to people like FedEx to deliver that piece or to buy my lunch and stuff like that. And that portion of that money went directly to help somebody else feed their family, take care of their bills, do those things. I don't want to, I'm trying to be too abstract here. I'm just trying to to me, every one of those is freighted with meaningful, purposeful work that makes a tremendous difference in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And it's tragedy to me that somebody would say, oh, your job makes a difference, but maybe my job doesn't. Look, your job makes a difference. It either hurts people, which hopefully most of you are not in, or it helps people, period. And if you're not working actively against God's will in the industry that you're working in, then you're helping people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And those are good things, and they're holy things, and they're things that make an extreme difference in the world. And if you approach your job, whether it's entry level or not, whether it's boring or not, whether it's your dream job or not, with that kind of attitude, then you have a purposefulness to your life. You have a mission to your life that is irreplaceable, that is meaningful, and that you were built to do. Like you're built to have that kind of desire to do that kind of purposeful work. And that transforms everything. It doesn't matter what specific job that you're doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It is really cool when you are on the lookout for those things and can look at even the simple things like somebody making the food and realize, hey, that is a real blessing. And if you're in a position where you're the person who's making the food, a lot of the time it's hard to have that perspective because people end up being really demanding and picky. And when you put tomatoes on their sandwich and they weren't actually wanting tomatoes on their sandwich, then it's really hard to feel like you're being a blessing to people. But when you are able to look at it with that mindset and say, hey, maybe even if they don't say it, like the fact that I got to make food for that family and they're like, I can see them sitting over there and they're enjoying a meal together. Like that is a blessing, and taking the opportunity to say that. And the other part of this too that I think is worth noting that about the purposefulness is that even aside from how directly or indirectly you may be able to see the blessing. So, Jonathan, when those people you were talking to who were saying that they're envious of your job, maybe it's a much more indirect for them to be a blessing to people than it might be in jobs like ours. But regardless of that, their job, their work has every bit as much purpose, if nothing else, for the sole reason if they are believers in Christ, because that is exactly where God has put them. And if God has put them there, then God has put them there for a reason. And that in and of itself is a tremendous amount of purpose. If you sit and fully think about what the implications of that are, that God could have you in an infinite number of different places. You could have ended up in so many other places and times and spaces and workplaces around so many other people. And yet he specifically designed and in his orchestration of the world that you would be in the job around the people doing the work that you are doing very specifically, and that is for a reason. And if you're able to look at that and say, wow, so in accordance to that, I do get to be a blessing because God is giving me this opportunity to be a blessing. So let's do it. Then I think that just about more than almost anything else we've talked about is a massive, massive difference maker.
Man, pay attention to what David just said. I think it's really powerful words. One time I was doing something and I was frustrated and I felt like it was not going as well as it should. And I was trying to figure out if I was even in the right place and all that kind of stuff. And I had a good friend and a wise mentor tell me, he's like, well, you're in the right place. And I said, well, how do you know? He said, because you're here. You know, when you're not here, it's not the right place anymore, right? I mean, like if you believe in this stuff, like God put you here and he hasn't taken you out yet. And until he does, then you should assume you're here. And if that's the case, then you either hang on and work hard at this thing and God be glorified, or you ride this thing into the ground and then see how God picks you up and God be glorified in that. In other words, and what was interesting was he stripped out all my excuses, right? Like he just got past all the like holier than thou, like, well, maybe I'm just not following God's will, or maybe I'm just not. And he was like, don't give me that garbage. And he didn't say that, but like basically that's what he accomplished. Like, don't give me that garbage. You're here. Clearly you're supposed to be. Do you believe God's big enough to move you out of here? Yes. Okay. Then he hasn't. So don't question God's sovereignty. Now, secondly, do it. Do whatever you're doing and stop worrying so much about the outcome. There's plenty of verses that say, that's not your responsibility. You trust God to that. And instead concentrate on doing your piece and make God be glorified. And it was a little uncomfortable at the time because I was getting exposed for my weaknesses, right? But as time has gone on, that lesson has become so powerful because it allows you to work even in times of stress, even in times of frustration, and maybe even better in times of success with a proper perspective, which is, you're here. That's your job. What David just said, do the best that you can with it. Trust God for the outcomes, but it's a good thing to work. And you come with that attitude, you'll find that places that you work are good places to work. It's funny how those things go together.
Yeah. And the final tiny caveat is that that's not to say that there are not bad places to work and that there is not opportunities. There's not going to be times where you should leave certain workplaces. There's definitely places where there's times where you should recognize, I should not be working here anymore. And God usually has a very direct way of making that clear to you. And if not, there's probably other people that you can talk to who can help to make that very clear to you. But we're talking about aside from that, ultimately, if there aren't very, very clear reasons for you to be leaving a job and to be leaving positions, God's got you there for a reason, and embrace that and look for the blessings that he has for you there.
Yeah, excellent advice and excellent reminder, David. We should maybe do a whole podcast on quitting. And so, but let's, for the record, state, if there are times when you're in a cruddy job and the best thing you can do is leave said cruddy job and get a better one.
Yep.
And so none of this should be construed to cause you to not do that. So, well, maybe you're saying, well, yes, but if I just had the right skills, or I'm trying to figure out what's next, or I'm trying to figure out how to do those things. Well, that's what Unbound's all about. So here at Unbound, we specialize in helping young people, especially from high school to post-high school age, figure out what's next. And that's not like a formula that we're going to give you, but it's a series of questions and tools we can give you to help you make wise decisions about what's next in your life. Spoiler alert, it's mostly about how to take action and then evaluate what happens from there. That to train you in transferable skills, this is what we do for a living. And so we have a pretty good idea of the kinds of things that people are hiring for and what they need. And it is things like showing up and high integrity, stuff like that. But it's things like task management, time management, conflict resolution, communication skills, leadership skills, relational skills, all those kinds of things. And so Unbound specializes in training those and does it in a way that connects people to a network of jobs. As you may have heard us say recently, all of our graduates are hired. We still have 80-some open positions around. And so we don't have any problems getting our students hired at our top end programs. And then finally, it's about people. And so it's about doing that in the context of community and equipping you to be in a community that can pay dividends for life. There is a reality to the world that the people that you meet between the ages of 16 and 25 often have an outsized influence in the rest of your life. And it's worth considering who those people might be, where you're going to find them, and realize that you're likely going to have ongoing relationships with them for a very long, long time. And their influence is going to be felt perhaps throughout the course of your life. And so if you're interested in those kinds of things, maybe we suggest that you go to beunbound.us and look at the programs that we offer, ranging from high school programs with our Equip and Explore programs through a whole selection of courses you can take, with more coming soon this fall, to our flagship program, Ascend, which is for post-high school students who are looking for that next step, trying to figure out what's next, get marketable skills, and do it in a community. And David and I can attest in so many ways that that is indeed a community that impacts you for life. We experience it in our own lives. We see it in the lives of our students, and we see the ongoing ripples effects of that. Just recently, we had somebody hiring people that need more experience, and we were talking to alumni from 10, 12, 13, 14, 15 years ago that we're still in contact with. We still were able to connect with and offer some life-changing opportunities because we know where they came from, we know the kind of people they are, and because they're connected to Unbound. So if that's interesting to you, check out beunbound.us. For the rest of it, think a little bit more purposefully about your work, realize the redemptive power of it, and understand that just doing things that are pretty basic can give you superpowers in today's professional world. And until next time, be unbound.